Chapter 9. The Young Girl Against Herself. The Young Girl as Impossibility. That the spectacle would have finally reached the absurd metaphysical conception according to which everything is supposed to issue from its idea and not the opposite. This is a superficial view. In the young girl we see clearly just how they obtain a reality, such that it seems to be nothing but the materialization of its concept. They amputate it from everything that would make it singular to the point of making it similar in poverty to an idea. This human foreignness to the world of commodities relentlessly pursues the young girl and constitutes, for her, the supreme menace. Menace that, factually, is in no way incompatible with complete security and complete absence of need in the order of everyday preoccupation. Quoted by Martin Heidegger. This anguish, which is the fundamental mode of being of whosoever can no longer inhabit his or her world, is the central, universal, and hidden truth of the era of the young girl, and of the young girl herself. Hidden, because it is when she is shut away at home, far from any gaze, that she sobs and sobs. For she who is gnawed by nothingness, this anguish is the other name for solitude, the silence and dissimulation that are her metaphysical condition, which she has had such a hard time getting used to. For the young girl, as for all other blooms, the craving for entertainment is rooted in anguish. Sometimes the young girl is bare life, and sometimes she is death dressed up. In fact, she is that which constantly holds both together. The young girl is closed up on herself. This fascinates at first, and then it begins to rot. Anorexia is interpreted as a fanaticism of detachment that, given the impossibility of any metaphysical participation in the world of commodities, seeks access to a physical participation in it, which of course fails.
Spirituality, our new need, is there a hidden mystic in all of us?
Self-interest is but the apparent motive of the young girl's behavior. In the act of selling herself, she is trying to acquit herself of herself, or at least have them acquit her. But this never happens. Anorexia expresses in woman the same aporia that is manifest in men in the form of the pursuit of power, the will to mastery. It is only that because of the greater severity of the culture's patriarchal codification upon woman, the anorexic brings the will to mastery to bear upon her body, for she cannot bring it to bear on the rest of the world. A pandemic similar to the one we see today among young girls emerged at the heart of the Middle Ages, among the saints. Against the world that would reduce her to her body, the young girl opposes her sovereignty over her body, in the same way the saint opposed the patriarchal mediation or meditation of the clergy to her own direct communion with God. She opposed the dependency through which they would have her liked to keep her to her radical independence from the world. In saintly anorexia, the suppression of physical urges and basic feelings, fatigue, sexual drive, hunger, pain, frees the body to achieve heroic feats and the soul to commune with God. Rudolf Bell, Holy Anorexia. Now that the medical profession has replaced the clergy in the patriarchal order as well as that, besides, of the anorexic young girl, the cure rates for which they have rapidly named anorexia nervosa are still exceptionally low, in spite of considerable therapeutic perseverance here as everywhere. Only in a few countries has the mortality rate fallen below 15%. For the death of the anorexic, whether she is holy or mental, only sanctions her final victory over her body, over the world. As in the intoxication of a hunger strike pushed to the end, the young girl finds in death the ultimate affirmation of her detachment and purity. Pause. The anorexics struggle against feeling enslaved, exploited, and not being permitted to lead a life of their own. They would rather starve than continue a life of accommodation. In this blind search for a sense of identity and selfhood, they will not accept anything that their parents or the world around them has to offer. Pause. In what I shall refer to as a genuine or primary anorexia nervosa. The main issue is a struggle for control, for a sense of identity, competence, and effectiveness. Heilbruch, eating disorders, obesity, anorexia nervosa, and the person within. Quotes. Indeed, concludes the postscript to Holy Anorexia, anorexia could be seen as a tragic caricature of the disconnected, self-sufficient female, unable to affiliate and driven by an obsessive desire for power and mastery. There is indeed an objectivity of the young girl, but it is an imaginary objectivity. She is a contradiction frozen in a tomb-like immobility. Whatever she says, it is not the right to happiness that the young girl is denied, but the right to unhappiness. Whatever the happiness of the young girl might be in each of the separated aspects of her existence, work, love, sex, leisure, health, etc., she must remain essentially unhappy, precisely because these aspects are separated. Unhappiness is the fundamental mood of the existence of the young girl. This is good. Unhappiness makes people consume. The suffering and unhappiness intrinsic in the young girl demonstrate the impossibility of any end of history in which men would content themselves with being the most intelligent of the animal species, renouncing all discursive consciousness, all desire for recognition, any exercise of their negativity, the impossibility, in a word, of the American way of life. When she hears talk and negativity, the young girl calls her therapist. She has all kinds of words to avoid talking about metaphysics when she has the bad taste to make itself heard to distinctly. Psychosomatic is one of them. Like the model that she has necessarily, at one moment or another, dreamed of becoming, the young girl aims at total inexpressivity, at ecstatic absence, but the image has been sullied by its incarnation, and the young girl manages only to express the void, the living void, seething and oozing, the human void, until she vomits. The cyborg as supreme and immunodeficient stage of the young girl. The young girl gets depressed because she would like to be seen as a thing, like other things. That is, like other things seen from outside, though she can never quite manage it, because she would like to be a sign, to circulate without friction through the gigantic, semiocratic metabolism. The whole life of the young girl coincides with what she wants to forget. The apparent sovereignty of the young girl is also the absolute vulnerability of the separated individual, the weakness and isolation that nowhere find either the shelter, security, or protection they seem to be seeking of everywhere. Indeed, the young girl lives forever hot on her own tail. That is, in fear. The young girl presents us with the authentic enigma of happy servitude, in which we are not quite able to believe, the mystery of the radiant slave. The pursuit of happiness summarizes, as its effect but also as its cause, the unhappiness of the young girl. The young girl's frenzy over appearances manifests her craving for substance that can find nothing on which to stake itself. All the elegance of the young girl never manages to make one forget her invincible vulgarity.
Everybody beautiful. Everybody organic.
The young girl wants the best of all worlds. Unfortunately, the best of all worlds is not possible. The young girl dreams of a body that would not be purely transparent to the lights of the spectacle, and all she dreams of being nothing more than the idea they have of her. Frigidity is the truth of nymphomania. Impotence is the truth of Don Juan. Anorexia is the truth of bulimia. Because in the spectacle, where the appearance of happiness also functions as its sine qua non condition, the duty to simulate happiness is the way to all suffering. The translucent non-existence of the young girl attests to the false transcendence she personifies. What the young girl demonstrates is that no beautiful surface is without its terrible death. The young girl is the emblem of an existential anguish, expressed in the unfounded feeling of permanent insecurity. The spectacle consents to speak of sexual misery, in order to stigmatize people's incapacity to exchange one another like perfect commodities. It is true that the obstinate imperfection of the marketplace of seduction is worrying. The anorexic scorns the things of this world in the only way that makes her more contemptible than they are. Like so many others of our unhappy contemporaries, the young girl has taken the aporias of Western metaphysics literally, and it is in vain that she seeks to give herself form as bare life. The extreme extent of male impotence, of female frigidity, or rather of vaginal dryness, can be interpreted immediately as contradictions of capitalism. Anorexia expresses, at the level of the commodity, the most incontinent disgust for them, and for the vulgarity of all wealth. In all of her bodily manifestations, the young girl signifies an impatient rage to abolish matter and time. She's a body without soul, dreaming she's a soul without a body. Quotes, the onset of St. Catherine of Siena's anorexia was a consequence of psychic factors. In her case, her will to conquer bodily urges that she considered base obstructions in her path of holiness. Rudolf Bell, Holy Anorexia. End quote. In anorexia, we must see much more than a fashionable pathology. The desire to free oneself from a body entirely colonized by commodity symbolism, to reduce to nothing a physical objectivity the young girl wholly lacks. But this leads finally only in her making a new body from the negation of the body. And the anorexic young girl, as in the aesthetic ideal, the same hatred of the flesh and the fantasy of reducing oneself to physical purity, the skeleton. The young girl suffers from what we would call the angel complex. She aspires to a perfection that would consist in having no body. She can read the unilateralism of commodity metaphysics whenever she steps onto a scale. The anorexic seeks the absolute in her own way. That is, she seeks the worst of absolutes in the worst way. Bloom's desire, and consequently the young girl's, is not for bodies, but for essences. The absolute vulnerability of the young girl is that of the shopkeeper, whose merchandise can be stolen by any uncontrollable force. The young girl is a metaphysical creature in the adulterated, modern sense of the term. She would not submit her body to such ordeals, to such cruel penance, if she weren't fighting against it as though it were the devil itself, if she didn't yearn to submit it entirely to form, to the ideal, to the dead perfection of abstraction. This metaphysics is ultimately nothing but the hatred of the physical, conceived here as simply the other side of metaphysics.
How to dress organically.
The young girl is the commodity's ultimate attempt at transcending itself. It fails miserably.